I understand what Italian bread, French bread, and baguettes are, and I understand the proper techniques for making those breads. But we live in a new world, and we should embrace new ideas. Instead of trying to emulate the bread methods of the past, we should focus on the goal to make great tasting quality bread with methods and techniques that fit our busy schedules. Hi, I'm Steve, and welcome to my kitchen. Today I want to demonstrate how you can make bakery quality artisan bread. Like these, with only a few minutes of work, I want you to discard all your thoughts about how much work it is to make bread. These artisan breads require little or no kneading. This is as easy as making a bowl of Campbell's soup. Ah, I heard what you were thinking. Think about it. If you're going to make a bowl of Campbell's soup, you have to stir it. If you're going to make a no-knead bread, you have to stir it. But if you make a no-knead bread, you don't even have to open a can. How simple is that? I want to start by discussing the two basic schools of thought: no-knead bread and almost no-knead bread. No-knead bread is a method of making bread which replaces the arduous kneading process with long proofing times. You mix the ingredients, set it aside, and Mother Nature does the kneading for you. Almost no-knead bread uses less wet ingredients, similar proofing times, and is kneaded lightly for 10 to 15 times. Each method has its strengths, and the purpose of this video is to give you a visual side-by-side comparison of the two methods. Let's get started. I have set up my workspace with my bowls, my utensils, and my ingredients. For both methods, we will use the same dry ingredients: 3 cups of flour, 1½ teaspoons salt, a quarter teaspoon instant yeast. Let's get started. 3 cups of flour. I use the scoop and shake method for measuring flour. This recipe is very forgiving, and you don't need to be exact. I used bread flour, but it's perfectly acceptable to use all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour contains 12% gluten, and bread flour has 14% gluten. While bread flour may, as the package says, be better for bread, either is acceptable. 1½ teaspoons salt. There are a number of no-knead recipes in which the salt varies from 1 to 2 teaspoons, depending upon your diet. I use a heaping teaspoon to get my 1½ teaspoons. While I use kosher salt for my cooking and seasoning, I use basic everyday salt for my baking. And a quarter teaspoon instant yeast. There are two basic types of yeast: active dry yeast, which requires proofing, and instant yeast, also known as bread machine yeast, which can be used in its dry form. Since we're not going to proof the yeast, it's important to use instant yeast in this recipe. And if you have an old jar around the house, check its expiration date before using it. Once you've combined all your dry ingredients, stir them so that they will be evenly distributed. For wet ingredients, we'll be using cool tap water: 12 ounces for no-knead bread and 10½ ounces for almost no-knead bread. There is a 1½ ounce difference between the two methods. As a result, the no-knead bread dough will be wet and difficult to shape. Its shape is created by the bakeware, while almost no-knead bread can be shaped and formed. Next, we'll add the wet ingredients. Next, we'll combine the wet and dry ingredients for the no-knead bread. It will take less than a minute to combine the ingredients. There, on to the next. Next, we'll combine the wet and dry ingredients for the almost no-knead bread. Once again, it'll take less than a minute to combine the ingredients, but it will be a little more difficult because the almost no-knead dough has less water. At this point, it's easier to just wet your hand, then roll the dough ball, and the moisture from your hand will pick up the remaining dry ingredients. There. Now this is going to surprise you, but that was the hardest part of making the bread, combining the wet and dry ingredients. All we need to do now is cover the bowls with plastic wrap, leave them on the counter to proof overnight, and Mother Nature will do the kneading for us. I'll see you in 8 hours. Dough should be proofed for 8 to 18 hours, which gives you a lot of flexibility. You can make the dough in the morning and bake it for your evening meal, or you can make the dough in the evening, bake the next morning, and have oven-fresh bread for your lunch. Think about it. It takes me less than 5 minutes to make the dough, from the time I walk into the kitchen to the time I cover the bowl with plastic wrap. It would take me longer and be less convenient to go out and buy fresh dough. The dough is proofed 8 hours and more than tripled in size. It's time to fold, shape, and proof the dough a second time. The purpose of a proofing basket is to shape the dough during the second rise. I'm going to use the basket to proof the almost no-knead dough, which has less wet ingredients. But I can't use it to proof the wetter dough because the linen liner will draw the moisture out of the dough, changing the balance of wet and dry ingredients. To proof the wetter dough, I'll be using a non-stick skillet. I'm going to spray the skillet with non-stick baking spray. And I'll dust the proofing basket with flour. Next, we'll dust the workspace with flour. Scrape the no-knead dough out of the bowl. Its stringy nature tells us Mother Nature has done her job. And fold. We're just turning the dough over onto itself and forming a ball. That's all you need to do. And I'll place it in the skillet to proof. Let's add a little flour and scrape the almost no-knead dough out of the bowl. Once again, its stringy nature tells us Mother Nature has done her job. And here's the difference between the two doughs. The almost no-knead dough has a better balance of wet and dry ingredients, which allows you to form and shape the dough. Some bakers knead the dough 10 to 15 times. All I do is roll it around and wake up the yeast. Okay, let's pause for a moment and evaluate what we have. Look at this dough. It doesn't know you didn't knead it. You can do anything with this dough. You can put it in a Dutch oven, bake it on a pizza stone, shape it into a cinnamon roll. Between the two methods, the opportunities are endless. Here's my list of breads. Each requires a certain amount of adaptation, but none require kneading. I even use this method to make my pizza dough. I hope to make one video a month demonstrating the various methods. Check YouTube and look for my videos. I've placed the dough in the skillet and covered it with a flour sack towel to proof. Before I leave the kitchen, I'll prep the oven. I've positioned the rack in the lower part of the oven and inserted the baking vessel. I do in advance so I don't forget. I'm going to proof the dough for an hour and a half, and I want to preheat the oven for half an hour, so I'm setting the timer for 1 hour. It's been an hour, and I'm setting the oven to 450 degrees, and I'll reset the timer for an additional 30 minutes. I know the oven will come to temperature before 30 minutes, but a Dutch oven is a heat store, and it needs to be at 450 degrees for 10 minutes to come to temperature. The dough has been proofing for an hour and a half, and the oven has been heating for 30 minutes. It's time to bake the bread. Look how easy it is to transfer the dough to the Dutch oven when you use a skillet as a proofing basket. Next, I want to center the dough and make sure it's positioned for the oven rise. I want the boley to be nice and round. Next, we'll transfer the almost no-knead dough from the proofing basket to the Superstone baking vessel. Note, I used a round proofing vessel for the boley and an elongated proofing vessel for the sassafras Superstone. I'm going to snip the top of the loaf to add character and control expansion during oven rise. It wouldn't have done any good to slice the top in the proofing basket. I turned it upside down when I transferred it to the baking vessel, so I needed to wait, and the scissors gives me the ability to reach into the hot vessel safely. The bread should be baked for 30 minutes with the lid on the Dutch oven. It's been 30 minutes. I've taken the top off and reset the timer for an additional 3 minutes. The experts recommend baking the bread with the top off for 15 to 30 minutes to get a rustic crust. Personally, my wife and I prefer a softer crust for our everyday bread. Our preference is to bake the bread for 3 to 5 minutes with the top off. You should experiment and develop your own preferences. It's been 3 minutes. The bread is ready. Let's take a look. The appearance is excellent and the taste is great. I can't overexpress the pleasure of having fresh artisan bread around the house, and it is, almost, as easy as making a bowl of Campbell's soup. My dear friends, baking bread the no-knead way is something your kids could do. Think how proud one of your kids or grandkids would be if they made the bread you served at the dinner table. What an excellent opportunity for introducing your kids to the joys of baking. This is fun stuff.